Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session of the FSR debates. My name is Marta Cesini, and I'm happy to moderate today's discussion together with my colleague Nicola Rossetto, who will facilitate the audience Q&A later in the session. So feel free to start asking questions during the presentation if you have any. Our topic today is as strategic as it is technical. We are going to be discuss capacity versus production, which support model for clean hydrogen. So this question really touches the core of Europe's ambition to scale up a market for renewable hydrogen. And so this really depends not only on technological readiness, but also on smart and well-calibrated public support. To help us navigate this, we are drawing on a recent and rigorous study published in Energy Economics by Alexander Buchstein, who is here with us today. This paper really explores different support mechanism for green hydrogen, and the analysis suggests that production-based instruments tend to introduce more significant operational distortion than their capacity-based counterparts. These findings really resonate strongly with current EU policy developments, including the Hydrogen Bank and the RED III targets. And they really also raise important questions for the design of future EU hydrogen support schemes. So after Alexander presents his work, we will hear responses from two exceptional discussants. Today with us, we have Evelina Daniel. She's a policy officer at the European Commission DG Clima Low Carbon Solutions. Hello, Evelina. And then we have James Kneebone, who is a research associate at the Florence School of Regulation, and you probably already know. Hello, James. So they will share their reaction to the paper and draw connection to ongoing policy design and market implementation efforts before we open the floor to the question from the audience with Nicola guidance. So let's begin. Alexander, the floor is yours, please.
I think we lost Alexander, Marcia.
Nice.
It disappeared while you were talking.
Okay. So I don't know what we can do about this. Maybe we can just wait a bit. Maybe he had
try to write to him. Yes.
I think
first time.
Yeah, I know. Usually it's like some of the discussants that are like
no, but it was there. He was there while the video was going on, the introductory video. Maybe Tomiris, you could resend the link to Alex. Because I don't have a phone number.
Not to put her on the spot, but Evelina is working on the European Hydrogen Bank, of course, which is, principally the main reason why this subject is interesting. No, these production credits for hydrogen. I don't know. Maybe she would feel comfortable contextualizing a little bit why this debate on production credits for hydrogen is relevant. And
before we reconnect with hopefully with Alexander.
Yes, absolutely. Happy to do so. So maybe I can already take a bit of time to introduce myself and give a couple of reactions already to the paper. Thank you again for inviting me. Very interesting research, very rich paper. So yes, I work in DG Clima in the team working on the Innovation Fund, and under Innovation Fund, which is a funding instrument, especially in the sense that it is financed by the revenues from the carbon market. We do many different things, and amongst them, there is a hydrogen auction. And with this hydrogen auction, we are supporting production So our support is for production. You already see where I'm going with this, of the RFNBO, so let's say renewable hydrogen. And we had the first auction in 2023. It was a pilot. There was a lot of expectations around it, a lot of nervousness, but by now we had already the results, and we are now evaluating actually the second auction and going for the third round at the end of this year. And I must also say that I was particularly attracted to the paper because my previous job in the Commission was in the modeling team of DG Energy. So yes, energy system modeling, something that I've been quite involved in the previous years. So this is just perfect marriage of the two interests. So yeah, I guess that while we are waiting for Alexander to connect, I would be already giving you a couple of remarks.
So maybe Evelina, sorry, I see Alexander is finally back. Hello, Alexander.
That would be a better sequence, yes.
Yes.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I had some slight connection issues,
Yeah,
but the connection seems to be much better now.
That's good. That's good. So we can start with your presentation now if you want to share your screen. And
Great, I'll do that.
I was afraid there was a blackout in Belgium.
Apparently those things are not, impossible, apparently, we've seen before. But great, I hope you can see my slides now. So good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here to present to you some of my research, which is related to hydrogen subsidy schemes. So basically what me and my co-authors, whose names you can see on the slide here, have looked into is different ways on how we could subsidize hydrogen. And we looked in particular to two groups of subsidy schemes, ones that I will be calling capacity-based mechanisms, and another group that I will be calling production or energy-based systems. And I'll make more clear later what exactly I mean with those two groups. And we look into, what would be the most cost-effective way to subsidize hydrogen. But first, perhaps some context. So where do things stand in the hydrogen sector? So it appears that still we are using mainly steam methane reformers to produce our current, hydrogen demand, almost 95% of that. And we've seen a gradual uptake of electrolyzer capacity globally. So we exceeded 1 gigawatt in 2023, but this still seems to be much lower than what a lot of studies are kind of, were kind of expecting. Also, if you look into kind of which sectors would want to use hydrogen, it seems to be that we're not on par with that. And because of, mainly the reason is because it's still not cost competitive yet to produce green hydrogen compared to using steam methane reformers. And it's because of this that governments also want to support this uptake in renewable hydrogen. So from that raises then the question how to cost effectively organize that. Because of course, there is trade-offs in different designs. We've seen this before when it came to renewable energy support. A lot of research has gone into that, how we best approach that, and there is perhaps things that we can learn from that. But definitely there is some differences. So what's very important in renewable energy support is the kind of the trade-off between shielding investors somewhat from variable electricity prices, while still kind of taking away the risk, but still somehow keep them somewhat responsive to electricity prices, not completely take away all incentive that is being provided by electricity prices. That is what kind of subsidy design is all about, is the trade-off between taking away risk, but retaining the economic incentives to produce when it is needed. So we were kind of worried that when it came to hydrogen production, these kind of effects would be much kind of more distortive and much more pronounced because these electrolyzers are fully dispatchable. So they can be kind of ramped up or down depending on what prices are. So if you impose these kind of subsidy schemes, you're very directly influencing the decision making from these electrolyzers. So that's why we looked into kind of this research question where we with a model kind of capture investment behavior into electrolyzer electrolyzers, and so on, and kind of capture how they operate, let's say. So this slide is an overview of some support schemes in Europe, but also abroad in other countries. So what we kind of saw is that historically, a lot of the support was kind of on a project basis, that certain projects got awarded grants, and this was kind of on a capacity basis. And now there's kind of a trend towards using auction systems to kind of more cost effectively allocate the funding, which is of course a good trend. And along with that, we are moving more towards what I call energy-based subsidies or quantity-based subsidies, where you remunerate actual hydrogen production rather than on a megawatt basis, how much kind of electrolyzer you would install. But what seems to be somewhat overlooked is another system where you would use an auction-based system, but on a capacity basis. So a system where actors would bid in, a certain project of a certain megawatt, and they would ask for a certain amount of subsidy per megawatt, rather than a subsidy per kilogram of hydrogen production. So that's also a system that we kind of included. Some sort of capacity grant, we call it, where you get a subsidy per megawatt. In total, there's actually 4 mechanisms. We looked also into an investment subsidy where you get a certain percentage of your capex, and that with the fixed premium approach that the European Hydrogen Bank takes, and another system, a contract for difference approach, where basically a hydrogen subsidy scheme would kind of top off your revenues that you get from selling hydrogen in a hydrogen market, so that you kind of get a total fixed revenue. So we consider, we kind of calibrate these different subsidy schemes so they would accomplish the same actual hydrogen production, so the same quantity of hydrogen that they actually deliver, to then make a comparison. So very quickly about the model. So this is a kind of equilibrium model in which we capture an electricity market where investments can happen in renewable energy and also in conventional production facilities, fossil-based, where there is a certain hydrogen demand that fluctuates, and out of that come electricity prices. This is linked with the hydrogen market, where we have the electrolyzers competing with steam methane reforming. Of course, those also have electricity demand, and this is kind of linked together. But I'll maybe switch to the results, which are a bit more interesting, I would say, than the model. Well, yeah, maybe this is one more slide on the costs, perhaps. What's most important here is that we consider 2 electrolyzer technologies, one which we call a peak load technology and one which is a base load. So the base load would be more expensive to invest in, but it would give you also a higher efficiency in operation. So your operational cost would be lower in that technology, and vice versa for the peak load technology. Let's move now to the results. So simply for transparency, I wanted to kind of show our central reference case, in which we impose 10 megatons of import by 2030 and a total hydrogen demand of 20 megatons that then gradually grows towards 2050. I would say that this kind of picture is rather optimistic, let's say, but I just wanted to mention that you also do a very like a broad set of sensitivities where this picture is different, let's say. Let's now move to the results from what happens when we actually apply these kind of subsidy schemes. So what I'm showing in the graph, let's maybe focus on the first 4 schemes, which are the fixed premium, the CFD, the capacity investment, and the investment subsidy. We see that both the peak load and the base load technology are being attracted by all the mechanisms. So kind of intuitively, you might think, if we're remunerating capacity on a capacity basis, we might only be attracting this technology, which is simply cheaper in capex. But this is not really the case. Similar to what happened in the European Hydrogen Bank, if you let participants bid based on euros per kilogram of hydrogen, they will just simply calculate the capex cost into their bids, both the OPEX and capex cost into their bids. And it's no different when you allocate support based on a capacity basis. Participants will kind of translate their operational costs and their capex cost into a bid on a capex basis. What we did see is that these capacity-based mechanisms, they tend to install more capacity. And this is something that's kind of known of these types of subsidy schemes. If you do remunerate based on capacity, you will attract more capacity. It's especially in the investment subsidy that a lot more investments occurred. So to kind of realize the same target, to kind of the same hydrogen quantity, it will accomplish this with more electrolyzer capacity, basically. And we saw that there was some sort of a slight selection bias towards the cheaper unit, the unit that is cheaper to install, which is kind of a known disadvantage of these kind of approaches. But now, let's now move to the influence on the power sector, because this is also important to consider. So we saw that all technologies kind of attracted a lot more renewables, of course, a lot more investment into renewables needed to happen to kind of realize this uptake in renewable hydrogen. And what we saw is that all mechanisms also would displace fossil-based generation. So it becomes less attractive to use fossil-based generation to produce electricity when we install more electrolyzers, let's say. This is because there is somewhat of a synergy between renewables and electrolyzers. If you put a lot of flexible load in your system, which these electrolyzers are, suddenly the kind of the business case for renewables also tends to improve because there is basically less curtailment. Just wanted to mention that briefly as well. But let's now turn to kind of the disadvantage of these energy-based subsidies. So of course, you're very much in these systems, you're very much directly influencing the decision-making of electrolyzers, and you're kind of artificially increasing electricity prices because simply these electrolyzers, when they are setting the price in the electricity market, they're simply willing to pay more for electricity because you're giving them a subsidy to produce hydrogen, and this increases electricity prices. So this is something to be aware of. Now, of course, how can we then kind of compare those disadvantages of different mechanisms? Well, what we can do is look into total system costs to make a comparison. And here you can kind of see where the additional costs from imposing hydrogen targets comes from. You see, in fact, that most of the cost comes from increased investments in renewables that needs to happen. Most of the cost is in the power system, rather than the cost of these of the capex of these electrolyzers. If we now kind of compare all these mechanisms, we saw that this capacity-based mechanism did seem to perform better than these fixed premium or CFD approaches. Because again, this links to the synergy that there is between renewables and electrolyzers. These capacity-based mechanisms, they might realize more kind of investments into electrolyzers, but that is the kind of model seems to be lenient towards over-investing into electrolyzers, because this also kind of decreases the effort required of the renewables. That's what's written on this one, and then I can move to a conclusion slide. So we implemented this model, which captures the interactions that exist between hydrogen and electricity markets. We compared different mechanisms to subsidize hydrogen, both capacity-based mechanisms and energy-based mechanisms. We saw that the kind of choice of mechanism influences how much renewables would be needed in a cost-optimal scenario to kind of meet a certain hydrogen target, and how it kind of displaced fossil-based generation in the power sector, rather in contrast to what some people think, that if you subsidize hydrogen, you would get more kind of fossil-based electricity generation. in the power sector. We saw that these capacity-based instruments seem to have somewhat of a slight technology selection bias, and that they install more electrolyzer capacity. But we saw that those distort electricity prices less. And overall, it seemed to perform best. We have also this research currently published. I put the full name of the paper on the slide here as well for people who are interested. And that brings me to the end of my presentation, and I look forward to an interesting discussion.
Thank you, Alexander. Very clear overview of your studies and your findings. Now let's turn to our discussants for their reactions. So I will start with Evelina. And so how do you interpret the findings and the study in light of your current position and that of the EU policy architecture?
Thank you, Marcia. I actually already started to reveal a little bit my remarks, but now back to the track. And now that we also had the full presentation from Alexander, thank you, Alexander. So yes, on the first glance, I found the conclusions surprising because, as you know, under the Hydrogen Bank that we organized under the Innovation Fund, we actually went for the production support. So reading the paper, how come that support for the capacity would be better? Obviously, before deciding, on the model of support, we did not do energy system modeling. I mean, you also did it on quite big amounts of hydrogen that we would have never possibly targeted with the amounts of budget that we had for the pilot auction. We had 800 million euros. That would be very, very far from incentivizing 15 million tons of hydrogen. But still, yes, I was surprised. And just to tell you that when we were discussing, even very early on, the design of the hydrogen auction with academia, with stakeholders, very quickly we were oriented to the production support, and for a very simple reason, that there was a fear that we might incentivize construction of the capacity. It will be built all right, and then it might sit idle because electricity prices might be actually higher than expected, off-takers will not materialize, and then that would be a total failure, of course, of the public support to incentivize building an installation that will never operate. Okay, it seems to me from your paper that in a way you solve this problem imposing in every scenario that the subsidized capacity will produce, but confronted with the real life situation, we felt that incentives will be better aligned with what project developers will encounter as the years go by if they get incentives for the production. So we make sure that they don't only construct, but they also deliver this hydrogen. Now, you are right that there are some support schemes which are for the capacity, and they also work. And I can also tell you that under Innovation Fund, other funding programs, we are actually much more geared to the capacity. We allow projects to claim most of the payments even before entering into operation. So this can work. There is also the renewables financial mechanism recently operationalized. That's outside Innovation Fund, which is actually the bids are placed on the capacity of renewables. But here for hydrogen, with this very nascent market, there was really very strong concern. It has to not only be constructed but also operate. This is why we went in this direction. And in a way, we see that we saw that correctly because there are so many projects which struggle actually to reach FID from other support schemes. The hydrogen IPSIS notably. They all struggle to even reach FID. Exactly, one of the problems is that they struggle to secure the contracts for electricity. I saw that in the paper you did not go into the nuance what is compliant with the delegated acts. Yes, but I mean this is the of course reality that they are facing. Now, the second observation, I'm mindful of the time. When you had different variants of the fixed premium, I saw that there were on some of them there was the constraint on the number of full load hours. So yes, and then the guiding thoughts behind that was, okay, let's avoid over-subsidization. And of course, I would be cheerleading for that as well. Of course, we also want to have the perfect design, the one that is using the best, the very scarce public resources. But again, discussing this with future bidders, with the stakeholders, we very quickly realized that if we put a very rigid system which also makes sure that there is not a single euro not correctly spent, then we see that, for example, we at some point we're considering also clawbacks in case there is over subsidization. And then it was actually financial sector that was telling us that if there is uncertainty, if, for example, you were to go for the contract for difference, that will make projects a bit less bankable. Actually, what banks preferred is that there is a steady source of revenue and project has a flexibility in the way it operates. So, yeah, maybe I'm telling you a little bit the stories how the theory meets reality, but I think it's useful to share. But of course, yes, the main principles we think that we ensured by our design of limiting any big risk of over subsidizing. Now, I was very much reassured that from the paper, actually fixed premium is better than contract for difference, because that was also a big discussion point for us at the beginning. Again, our choices were way more pragmatic. Again, this wish from project developers to have a steady source of revenue, because that made a project more bankable, much easier to secure, for example, loans from the commercial banks, not having to go also to the promotional banks, and then going into this very dangerous territory of accumulating, different types of public support if those promotional loans are also, public support. And then, yeah, I already commented that, yes, in your paper, you model the subsidies for big amounts of hydrogen. Just to put it in perspective, in our pilot auction from 2023, if you take the winners, they would be producing 0.15 million ton of hydrogen. And then if you took all the bidders, they would be producing 1 million tons of hydrogen. So that was the scale at which we're operating, and therefore, of course, the distortion effect would be much smaller. That hydrogen is bringing bigger system costs, no big surprise. We've been there with actually scenarios done Fit for 55. Now I refer to my past work in DG Ener. Obviously, I mean, there are other pathways, but we also know that we are preparing for the climate neutrality pathways, and if we don't test those technologies before 2030, then we might be in difficulty afterwards. And now coming back, so yeah, capacity mechanisms have less of the system cost. This is the conclusion. And even though I initially said that I find it surprising, now actually on the reflection, I think what your paper also shows is that in general, the strategy for the electrolyzer to oversize a bit and therefore adapt better, to the renewables prices actually works. And even though we went for the fixed premium with the Innovation Fund pilot auction, we actually allow that. So if you look at the bids that were awarded, information on that is all public. You can actually see that for the same size, they are not exactly planning to produce the same amount. So you can already see that the strategies are a bit different. We left it totally, the choice of the bidder. Okay, if we see that they are planning operating electrolyzer beyond, 8,760 hours, then probably would have a couple of red flags. But other than that, it is totally their choice. You can also see, even in the project pitches, which are totally public, that they almost all have pretty elaborate strategy, buying a bit via PPAs, a bit on the spot market. So yes, this is the main factor of competitiveness. And then size of the electrolyzer is yet another factor that can be exploited. And then again, in the defense of our way of going for the production support, we are the fixed premium instrument, but we allow some variation in the production levels. So there is up to 140% flexibility. So if one year you have particularly good conditions, you can go above. If in another year less so, you can go below. And actually, if you go quite a lot in a couple of years, you can go through your grant. I mean, you can receive your grant earlier than during the 10 years, which is our period of support. So we have this element of flexibility also allowed. So I think that that goes in the good direction, and yeah, resonates with your finding as well. Of course, we all agree that it's best, to use renewables to their full potential. There shouldn't be the losses, and we are after the best systems cost. Well, we are one scheme. There are also other initiatives of the Commission in this direction, looking for the flexibility of the system, demand side response, system integration. I think the whole strategy from early 20s was exactly going in this direction.
Evelina,
so yeah, I think I'm finishing on this note that even though we were fixed premium, we're actually not that far from the ideas of allowing a bit of flexibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Evelina. Thank you. I think it was a long intervention, so maybe if Alexander would like to reply to any of the points raised by Evelina, and then we move on with James.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much for that reaction. I think the first point you mentioned, indeed, a trade-off I'm not capturing in my model is that with these capacity-based mechanisms, it might be much harder to get some certainty about how much actual production you will attract given a certain budget, right? Because in a model I can nicely calibrate them to attract a certain kind of actual hydrogen production. And we saw actually that the policy budget you would need for that was rather kind of in the same area. But yeah, in a real setting where you can have really a shock to the system that influences prices or so, yeah, it could lead to a much greater uncertainty about how much kind of actual hydrogen you would attract. So that's definitely like a valid concern and a reason you could use to opt for a fixed premium instead, where that is kind of built in that you're attracting hydrogen production. This kind of, in my opinion, comes down to what you want to accomplish with this auction, right? If it is really attracting electrolyzer investments, then perhaps capacity instruments are best. But of course, as a policymaker, you have to think also about the downstream benefits of actually having the hydrogen then and investments being able to happen in industry, let's say, making use of that hydrogen. And that you're more kind of certain about using a fixed premium approach. And then you briefly mentioned something about the kind of variance we investigated on the fixed premium. I didn't really kind of explain those in my presentation before, so I can maybe kind of elaborate a little bit on that. So we implemented some variance where we're putting kind of limits on how much hours you're able to receive subsidy. What this basically does is build in some sort of kind of over kind of subsidization limits. But what we kind of wanted to point out is that with kind of imposing these type of rules, you might make your system, like your kind of auction system, a lot less cost effective, because you're kind of in a way you weren't comprehending, influencing the decision making of your participants, and it could lead to a less efficient outcome. So indeed, we were okay with, let's say, the Commission opting not to implement these types of kind of over subsidization limits, let's say. So with that, I fully agree, I would say. But it was kind of, our angle was a bit less different, let's say. We were just modeling them to show that also with implementing these types of rules, you might be affecting the outcome in a way you weren't anticipating, let's say. We also had this one variant where we didn't allow any of this flexibility that you were mentioning before. This is also something the European Hydrogen Bank kind of accommodated, right? You're allowed to deviate a certain percentage from kind of the yearly average that you bid. So by default, in our all our scenarios, we kind of also allow this flexibility because we only impose you needing to reach a target on a 10-year basis. But then we did one scenario where we did fix that you exactly needed to reach these hydrogen targets that you bid in kind of per year. And then we saw that this was like the worst performing scenario of all of them, of course, because you want to keep this flexibility to your actors so they can kind of find a cost-effective kind of years in which to produce hydrogen and to kind of reach your targets. Let me check whether I covered most of your the things you mentioned. Yeah, I think I mentioned most of the things that you mentioned.
Thank you, Alexander. Now we move on to James. Please, your reflections on Alexander's work.
Yes, thank you very much. So yeah, we'll keep the reflections to a minimum and pose a few more questions because Alex and Evelina are really the points of reference to be discussing and postulating about these things more than me. But that being said, I really enjoyed the paper. Alex and I have had the pleasure of being able to discuss it a little bit at the office, also on the bike on occasion at the weekend. So so it's been nice to pick his brains on these things and the impacts for the sector. Not just for hydrogen, but because now this kind of auctions as a service and this kind of use of competitive credits has become very popular in lots of areas for decarbonisation. And now we have this Industrial Decarbonisation Bank, which we anticipate to take its leave in some regards from the successes of the EHB, the European Hydrogen Bank. So these questions about auction design are extremely interesting, and I think this has been a great session to understand where the kind of these modeled scenarios and these academic interpretations of best options push up against the realities of making projects defensible for the public budget. So that's been really interesting, and my questions go a little bit in that direction. So a few questions about the assumptions in the model, and then one about the implications for policy. So yeah, first of all, you say, in the paper, you basically take this hydrogen demand of 10 million tons assumed in 2020, 20 million tons in 2030, and 50 in 2050, which makes sense as per lots of the strategies and also the modeling scenarios. But as Evelina alluded to, of course, the subsidized volumes are going to be much less. We see that from the first examples, and also, just in reality, these targets we know are not going to be met, at least not for the next 10 or 20 years. Those short and midterm targets. So the first question is, do you expect that the results of your study could have been quite different if you'd had, targets that were, obligations for production that were maybe 50% or 25% of these numbers? Because presumably then you can use much more of these kind of cheap hours of electricity from the grid, for example. You can use the cheaper technologies. You don't push into more expensive periods of electricity generation, basically. And then secondarily, you also mentioned that your model matches daily demand with daily supply for hydrogen, which is, of course, commonplace when you're modeling electricity systems. But for the hydrogen sector, we know that more than likely it won't work like that. It will be buffered by storage, because you're not necessarily directly connecting demand and supply, at least in a renewables configuration. But that being said, you say that you do implicitly account for hydrogen storage still in the model. So I'd be curious to know how you manage that, and reflect a little bit on sort of solving that challenge from a technical perspective. And then a little bit to whatever Evelina brought up before. Your main conclusion is that these capacity-based systems could be more efficient, cheaper in terms of total system costs than production-based. And you showed a slide where you could see on the bar chart the difference in total systems costs, and I think it was it's somewhere within the range of maybe single-digit billions. Is that right? Maybe 10 billion max. That's for the total system cost, presumably at really significant volumes. So to a policymaker like Evelina, if you could make the case that, look, I know there's a risk that you might have, you might pay for assets that never get used, like Evelina raised concerns about, for example, but it's just so much cheaper. Then you can maybe make the case that just, you should take the risk because it's obviously the more competitive solution, right? You can make a more compelling case, but it looks at least, just from a glance, that actually the difference is relatively marginal. And I wondered, could you speak a little bit about the margin at the total level, but then also at the level of subsidy required? Because of course the level of subsidy required, i.e. the risk to the state, is, going to be a fraction of that fraction, essentially. So yeah, a couple of questions on the modeling and one then on the implications. And we can come back to the discussion if you like, but also, I see there's a few questions in the chat, so no worries if you don't get back to me, Marcia, it's okay.
No, yes, we will get back to you, James. Thank you. So Alexander, please.
Yeah, great. Let's maybe start with clarifying some things on questions on the modeling side. So indeed, what we use, what we call is implicit hydrogen storage. What we basically mean by that is we have these electrolyzer assets which can be dispatched on an hourly basis, but the hydrogen demand only needs to be met on a daily basis. So by kind of putting it in the model as such, what you're allowing it to do is just to choose within one day in which hours it is most cost effectively to produce hydrogen. So in reality, what you would need is storage to basically bridge at least 1 day of hydrogen production. But bridging 1 day of hydrogen production seemed like a realistic amount, let's say. We were considering doing this even kind of on a bigger time scale, saying that you would be able to cover fluctuations within 1 month or so. But being able to do so within 1 month really would require a rather elaborate hydrogen network with quite some storage, let's say. So we went for a more kind of careful 1 day matching, even though production can take place within an hour. But we call these kind of implicit storage because, of course, you don't know exactly how much storage you would need to be able to accomplish that. It's just a simple way of kind of accounting for this. Of course, the other way would be that you actually model a certain storage operator with a certain cost. Investment needs to happen into this, and you kind of keep track of how much hydrogen is in your storage at all times and so on. But this would kind of greatly improve the computational complexity, and so we went for a more simple approach, which allowed us then to kind of improve the model into more detail on areas where we were more interested, like, for example, the power system, kind of also modeling that into much detail.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up on that, Alex. Sorry to interrupt you. But just, did you then, if you were looking at the dispatchability of the electrolyzers, make comparison between electrolyzer technologies and the model then selected based on its ability to capture those cheaper hours? Because we know that different technologies have different, sort of ramping up times and...
Yeah, so in that case, we did assume that SMRs, for example, they had to produce in a flat kind of profile still. Okay. And I believe imports could happen also kind of hourly dispatched, because you would assume there's also some kind of storage on kind of import facilities, where you can also bridge quite some time. And then your other, maybe your other question on the modeling side was, of course, the kind of numbers we input for hydrogen production, let's say, and it's always the case in these type of models. You have to make some sort of assumption on how much hydrogen there would be, but we always try to be careful that we are not undermining our kind of conclusions with the assumptions we make there. Because it does seem quite unrealistic to put such high numbers there, but in the end, what it comes down to is when we are imposing extra hydrogen production, which kind of hydrogen production are you displacing? Are you displacing SMR-based production? Are you displacing import-based production? And so even though those numbers are quite big, the effects should still play on a smaller scale as well. Even those effects you were describing about in a power sector, which kind of technologies you're using to produce in a competitive market, you would assume that the same effects still apply also on a smaller scale. Even if it's really in the margin, you're installing 1 megawatt more in a certain node, let's say, that does create some extra electricity demand and so on. So those kind of effects that we're capturing should still kind of hold in a much smaller case study. But of course, we kind of push the model hard enough to make those changes actually visible, to draw conclusions from that. And also when it comes to your question on system costs, of course, yeah, it's always a bit tedious to look into total system costs. Those numbers are always, you know, 0.1%, 1%. But 1% of the total system cost of the European, electricity system and the European hydrogen system is really huge, right? And so if you can really only gain, single digits there, it's also something to consider, I would say. It was indeed in the end. You also mentioned it would be interesting to look at kind of the impact on policy budgets and so on. I think in an early stage we were also trying to come up with those numbers to put in the paper, but it's quite difficult to kind of correctly account what exactly it would cost a policymaker, because also it might distort your picture. In the end, you're kind of modeling wise, you're not really interested in how much the subsidy scheme would kind of cost for a policymaker, because you really have these ripple effects into your kind of subsidizing hydrogen, also requires extra investments into renewables and so on. And so it would be very easy to kind of paint a wrong picture really by showing those numbers, because of the assumptions in the model, the cost might not be on the policymaker in one system, but on kind of the system in another. And it's kind of not really reliable, let's say, to kind of present those numbers, which is a bit of a pity, because of course it's also an interesting, let's say, aspect which is different in those subsidy schemes. So it would be interesting to look at, but it would require a different analysis, I would say. And now I forgot your last question on your actual question on the one that you mentioned last.
No, you covered everything. So
okay.
Thank
you're
you.
okay. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah. Thank you, Alexander. So now on to the Q&A with Nicolas. Do we have any question in the
Well,
box?
we have a couple of questions. I must say there is a cool, maybe he put the question before you complete your presentation. So I don't know if you want to come back, Alexander, to his question. He wonder if, based on your studies, the contract for difference is the best model for the supplier of hydrogen. How would you answer to Akul?
So it seemed actually from the analysis that the CFD was not performing very well, which maybe was also somewhat to our surprise. Kind of one side note I have to make with that is obviously what the main advantage of such a CFD system would be is that it, in theory, should be more robust. It should take away risk for electrolyzer producers. But this advantage of CFDs, it seemed not to be that outspoken as we have seen it in electricity CFDs. This is mainly because what the hydrogen CFD in our model kind of captures is fluctuations between the daily hydrogen prices. I just explained to James' question, we have these daily hydrogen prices. This is basically what it is kind of mitigating. But those fluctuations in daily hydrogen prices, they really are not that big. I mean, in the end, it's gas prices. It's not comparable to what we have in electricity systems, where you really have great fluctuations during the day even. So kind of also the advantage of these CFDs is not that outspoken when in a hydrogen sector, because hydrogen prices are simply not that volatile as electricity prices. And they did seem to not perform that well in our analysis, because in fact the way the CFD works is so it will adjust the payouts based on kind of how much extra kind of subsidies required to meet a certain profitability. And because of that, it is simply higher in a lot of years. And it seems to be that the higher the subsidy you give, the more kind of inefficiencies that you get because of kind of how you're influencing electricity markets. So this is also kind of a key reflection also on these fixed premiums. It's really key to kind of keep the fixed premium outcome of your auction system low, not only for kind of cost effectively kind of giving your support, but also for not interfering too much with your electricity market. And it seems to be that these CFDs are doing that a little bit more than fixed premiums, because kind of the premium that they give kind of fluctuates throughout the years. And so you reach higher peaks, basically.
I see. I don't know, Evelina raised the hands. Do you want to intervene on this,
Yes.
Evelina?
I would love to intervene on the contracts for difference as well. I mean, to simplify it, I guess if there was one book of ideal public intervention, we would read in this book that CFDs are more efficient than fixed premium, right? And this is something that we also considered already for the pilot auction. I agree that there are less fluctuations. So okay, maybe not so much needed as for the electricity operators. Now I would see a way to model the impact that okay, you say I don't have the risks anymore. So when project is assessed by the investors, they also see it, those risks removed. So I don't know, maybe cost of capital gets lower, and then I see that reflected, right? I'm not sure that I mean, you in the energy system model you could go that far, but yeah, I would see this mechanics definitely happening. I also have one remark on the storage. What we have seen in the pilot auction, not so much storage availability, but there were a couple of integrated projects. So they can basically decide. I'm producing renewable hydrogen, but I'm also producing derivative. So when I have the full production, I'm going full production, on my derivative. If not, I'm putting that on hold. So there is this possibility of flexibility as well. And then just one remark to what was said before about what lessons for policymakers. Indeed, for the moment, I mean those schemes they are not so big, but as they grow bigger, I think that indeed we start to we should care more about the total system impacts. So I would definitely take lessons, for the future. Indeed, you mentioned Industrial Decarbonisation Bank. So yeah, the intention is to go bigger. But I would also have practically the question, okay, even today with smaller schemes, which will not, get to such magnitude of impacts, is there something that we could gently tweak in the design so that we are, closer to the ideal? I would have think that by allowing, a bit of fluctuation in the yearly production, we already made a smart choice. I think that also allowing projects to oversize their electrolyzer is also a smart choice. So yeah, if there are tweaks, to the existing design, I would be also all ears to that.
Thank you, Evelina. Maybe we have a long question by Victor, who left us. So let's see, but we try. I read it because I'm not sure I fully catch it. So I will ask Alexander to help me.
Nicola, sorry, maybe
Please.
instead of reading the whole thing, which is really long, I'll try to give it a short version, because I think it's just more of a reflection rather than a straight question. So I think is the main issue here is asking, are we addressing the wrong problem by proposing new layers of complexity with capacity mechanism rather than fixing in a way the real problem, which is the misalignment between RFNBO's rules and electricity market design, meaning clean energy package and capacity allocation and congestion mechanism regulation. I don't know if I was able to catch it and if it makes sense. But maybe Evelina or Alexander or James have some reflection. But this is just what I think Victor was, trying to say.
Yeah, I'm happy to give a first stab, but I think it goes way beyond, the paper that we are discussing today. I mean, it's the whole, hydrogen system, which is still nascent, and yes, all these regulations, they are only coming to place. I can tell you that from the Innovation Fund experience, we actually talked to the project developers, all the issues that they encounter on the way to FID already, and we are not even, at the entry into operation. So yeah, we are really a sandbox for those projects. So there is many of them. I think it's not too early to think about the best design of the public schemes. You can see that both on the European level and on the national level, we experiment with many different things. How many hydrogen support schemes are there in Germany, right? I mean, it's it's normal. So yeah, I think it's very interesting that actually you ventured already into modeling them in the energy system. I think we should assess the results. This is what we try to do a little bit on the European level, to talk, between the practitioners. Yeah, I mean, they add a level of complication, yes, because I mean, promoters have to adapt to the funding conditions. Now, from this, trying to say that okay, we should change something in the regulations, I think maybe too early. I'd rather focus on a good design which works with the existing regulation.
Thank you. Alexander, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I think Victor was mainly reflecting on the RFNBO rules that we do have in place, right? So I think it's fair that we kind of, we assess how those rules work, kind of considering the benefits that they bring, and also how it does kind of increase complexity for investors. I would perhaps refer more to the research of my colleagues, which look into how these kind of rules in particular influence market outcomes more. I mean, there's plenty of research going into how different designs of these rules affect the system and how they perform. So it seems more fair to refer them to my colleagues. Yeah, in the end, in my model, these kind of RFNBO rules were somewhat implemented, but they didn't really come into play really in my case, because we are just so lenient about how much renewable investments can happen. When we really can, when it's possible to invest hundreds of gigawatts into offshore, onshore, and solar energy, those rules really don't come into play, because you can just attract more renewable. You will just attract more renewables when you impose more hydrogen production, and it's not really a problem that you're increasing emissions by kind of supporting hydrogen. But this is kind of an idealized setting, I would say. In my case, you would to really study.
And we've lost him again.
We lost Alexander.
Yes. But okay, no, I think he's back. Hello, Alexander.
Sorry.
Yes. Just like really briefly, if you haven't finished your thoughts, otherwise.
Yeah, Zoom seemed to be very mindful of the time, and
yeah, exactly.
nicely kick me out when it's time to wrap up.
So thank you, Alexander, for your extremely interesting paper that really encouraged our discussion with Evelina and James, and also thank you to our audience for staying with us until the very end of this very stimulating debate. I think it's safe to say that this session has highlighted how complex the trade-off between market efficiency, investment certainty, and long-term climate goals is in the design of the hydrogen support schemes. So as always, the recording and the related materials will be available on the FSR website shortly. Thank you again. And Nicolò and I hope to see you at our next debate on June 4th, right?
Exactly. We have a date. We will open the registration very soon. It will be at 2 p.m. On the 4th of June. We will discuss electricity regulation in Europe with a few authors that contributed to a new handbook on the matter that our former director, Jean-Michel Lachante, just published with Edouard Elgar. So stay tuned and we will soon provide more information on this. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.